Dark Urge is the real MC. Wyll has the hero's background, sacrifices himself for Baldur's Gate. Narratively, if you actually analyze it, Shadowheart is the one where every act sort of can centralize around her a lot. I feel, like others here, that Lae'zel is the real main character, after Dirge of course. Gotta be Gale, between the tactical nuke in his chest and becoming a literal god of ambition that screams main character energy. Astarion, because I somehow always end up playing as him. Karlach is pretty cowboy though as a main. Rides into town to rustle up some squid bandits, then rides off into the sunset of hell. This video is a prologue to a series of videos I'm making about why each of the origin characters is actually the main character of Baldur's Gate 3. I recently made a poll asking you guys who you think is the main character, and the response, while heavily Shadowheart leaning, is actually more diverse than I expected. With this, in this video, I want to highlight some of what you guys said and also what people across the internet have said, as I thought this would be a fun little video to kind of prelude the series and just generally see what the community thinks about this topic. Also, the Shadowheart video is written and will be out soon. Like and subscribe to keep the channel alive. And before we get into the video, if you could leave a like, that would be amazing. If you could leave a quote-unquote hype, that would be even more amazing, because I guess it's this new thing that YouTube is doing for new videos. So yeah, if you could hit the hype button, that'd be pretty sick. Anyways, welcome to Purge Evil. Thank you for stopping by. Let's get into it. Here's a pretty good post. I know this is kind of a dumb question since the answer is whoever you choose to play as, but yesterday I was thinking about the story and wondering who out of all the characters you can play as is the most main character given everything that happens in the game. And after giving it some thought, I came up with this list of who out of the origin characters fits better in the main character role. I have not included the Dark Urge because I haven't played as the Dark Urge yet. I'm pretty sure everyone just agrees the Dark Urge is the main character anyways, but let's go. Also, this guy ranked these from least main character to most main character in order of the list. Astarion. As much as I like his story, he doesn't really make sense as a main character. The whole thing about Cazador and the spawns is completely unrelated to the main quest. This is true. So unless you're playing the evil version of his story and play as someone who was broken by his abusers so hard they began a quest of power that led him to not only replace his evil master, but also control the Elder Brain. It doesn't really make sense for him to be a main protagonist in this story. That was a pretty solid take. Tav. The player's character is a weird choice because on one hand, the fact they literally have no story makes them perfect for a main character. They're someone who finds themselves involved with the adventure, so everything happens to them. But on the other hand, the game doesn't even allow you to have a backstory, nor is your character special in any way. Not complaining, I think that's better for an RPG video game to be this way, but in terms of being the main character of the story, that lack of personal involvement makes Tav rank lower. So, you know, I can't rank Tav above the rest. The only reason why I didn't rank them the lowest is because I think having no personal stakes makes more sense as a main character trait than their personal journey having almost literally no connection to the main quest, as is the case with Astarion. There's a lot of people that I saw claiming that Tav is actually the main character, so that's a curious take. Good reasoning too. Shadowheart. Shadowheart plays very well as the main character of the story up until the end of Act 2. In Act 1 and 2, she's a big contender for the title of main character. After all, her quest to get the prism from the Gith is what triggers the story. She's the original wielder of the Astral Prism, and during Act 2, there's a lot of emphasis on Shar, Saluna, and her journey to become or not a Dark Justiciar, and the role of Ketheric Thorm, Isabel, and the Night Song play into all of this. The reason why I rank her so low on this list is because after that, she really has nothing to do with the main quest. Well, he's got a point there. Her journey to save her parents adds nothing to the main narrative, and she really has no stakes in the main conflict beyond getting rid of the parasite and saving the world. Karlach. Unlike Astarion and Shadowheart, Karlach's story is, at the very least, somewhat connected to the main plot of the game because of Gortash. Her quest for revenge against the guy she used to admire and sold her to the devil, the story of a hero who's trying to make things right before her time runs out, quite literally since you can't stop her infernal engine from failing, is great, and does play well as a main character arc. The only reason she's only third in this list is because I just think the others fit the role better. Wyll. Next for me, it's Wyll. I score Wyll above Karlach because even though he has no personal vendetta against any of the Chosen Three, his devotion to the Sword Coast and Baldur's Gate make him a good fit to be the main hero. I agree. Also, the plan of the bad guys involved kidnapping his father, so it does have personal stakes. Also true. Not to mention that the Emperor's story somewhat reflects into his to some extent in terms of that both were heroes who were turned into monsters. And the Emperor found meaning in being a mind flayer. Wyll sees his transformation into a devil as a curse, but the Emperor sees it as a good thing, etc. There's a lot more you could add to that about Wyll being a good case for the main character, but I'll save that for my video. I want to know your guys' thoughts. Gale is an odd choice because his involvement isn't as obvious as Karlach's and Wyll's, and especially in Act 1 he has nothing to do with the main story, but after that, in my opinion, he starts fitting better and better into the main character role. His quest for redemption in the eyes of Mystra is completely tied to the story. He could sacrifice himself at the end of Act 2, finding a hero's end by blowing himself up and destroying the Elder Brain, which would in fact end the threat right then and there. But in Act 3, his main quest is even more connected to the main story because of the Crown of Karsus. This is true, and how that item can either redeem him or help him gain godhood. Sure, he has no personal vendetta against the Chosen Three, nor was someone close to him kidnapped like Wyll, but I think his relationship with the Netherese magic and all that makes him a better fit for the main character role. Lae'zel. In my opinion, she's the one who makes more sense as a main character. She's trying to retrieve the prism in Act 1. Her journey to break up from the lies of Vlaakith is directly connected to the content of the prism, and in the end, regardless of your choices, the conflict between the Mind Flayers and the Githyanki is a key plot point, and the last choice is whether to save Orpheus or to side with the Emperor, which is basically the end of her personal journey. Also, she's the only one who's actually connected to Raphael to some extent, since Raphael is the one who has the Orphic hammer. That's a strong case. What's undeniable, he definitely made a good point about Lae'zel. Withers, obviously. Here's a counter for Astarion. My alternative answer would be Astarion for opposite reasons, no connections to the Dead Three, or the other relevant gods or goddesses, or to previous games. Astarion is just a sad, unlucky MFer who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that's classic protagonist for you. True. This one's kind of funny. If you ask them who the main character is, the Blade of Frontiers is going to tell you it's him. He's not even the main character of his own story. He does make for a good origin character protag though. Ties to Baldur's Gate, ties into the D&D module the tieflings are pulled from, and simple enough that players can easily project into him. You can make a case for the other companions, but after these three, it becomes much more of a stretch. Mentioning Shadowheart, Wyll, and Astarion? See, this is what I mean. It really is just a matter of perspective, because the original poster ranked Astarion as the lowest possible main character of the game, when these other people are ranking him in the top 3. Regarding Astarion, he has a very compelling personal story, can really compete with Dirge for good bad ending, and has such a main character feel to him, especially when playing his origin. The Cazador plot really works when considering him the main character, because then it's not disconnected at all anymore. This is something he has to deal with no matter what, just like Dirge with Orin. He also has a concrete reason for being pulled towards dominating the brain other than just being an evil F. In my brain, I can't get away from Redemption Dirge x Spawn Astarion being the main storyline. While very compelling, I don't feel the evil storyline is the main one, both because of BG1 and 2's history of Ballspawn and the fact there is a clear message about redemption and freedom in this game. Yeah, the Dark Urge Redemption character arc and storyline is just too good, dude. It's way too good. And then here's another one. Gale, Lae'zel, and Shadowheart feel much more like main characters. Wyll, Karlach, and Astarion feel like side characters. Again, the perspectives are just all over the place. It's all up to interpretation, but Lae'zel has the most connection to the main plot. Wyll for me. I always feel like a traditional heroic fantasy playthrough, as Tav leaves Wyll a bit sidelined. His personal relationship with his patron makes him feel like the only complete warlock experience. Saving all the tieflings and talking to Alfira gives him armor that massively upgrades his class damage output. He has the most synergy with all the tiefling NPCs, he just fits a heroic playthrough so much. I'm doing a Wyll playthrough right now and honestly utterly shocked that he works better as the player character than he does as a companion, because he actually gets to have agency. This I also completely agree with. I didn't complete a run as Wyll, but I did play a little bit, and I can attest to that. That is 100% true. It feels really good playing the game as Wyll. Dirge would be number one. I also think Astarion would make a great main character. Not despite his seeming lack of connection, but because of it. Okay, so that seems to be like the universal rule for why people think Astarion could be the main character, is because he doesn't have connection to the main story. He's a spawn who suddenly has his own will and control over his life and has to decide what to do with it. Of course, his main course of action is getting rid of Cazador, but once that's done, the tadpole is still an issue and could enslave him all the same. The thing that freed him could also be his downfall, giving him motivation and also agency. Plus, he stumbles into this massive conspiracy. It's more thematic connection and related to his backstory. His development throughout is immense if you choose the spawn ending as well. I would think that's rather satisfying to watch. Plus, not sacredly being already involved, but conveniently losing memory, looking at Dirge and Shadowheart in particular feels more natural storytelling-wise. That said, I think actually role-playing as Astarion could be rather lonely. No, he's got the charisma. The owlbear cub, obviously. Very true. The player is supposed to be the main character, however, I maintain as usual that Astarion is the main character. I'm actually getting surprised that there's so many Astarion people. His personal quest is more important than the main quest. Am I biased? Oh yeah. Here's a good post about the Dirge. And also regarding Dark Urge, there is just so much to say about the Dark Urge. I concur. Dirge essentially sets the game's central events in motion, and should you play as Dirge, the Elder Brain makes clear you are its preferred master. A single-minded desire for death on a scale unimaginable probably makes for a nice contrast to Gortash's complicated schemes, Thorm's treachery, or Orin's insanity. It's even a little suspicious the Emperor of all people was sent to retrieve the prism, an artifact in the possession of no less than 3 separate individuals who have a grudge against Ketheric Thorm in particular. It's not impossible Dirge intended for Thorm to be assassinated, take his stone from whoever had it, then betray them at the 11th hour. Given what happens to Gortash in certain letters found in-game, Dirge was planning Gortash's ending for a long time and was playing a very long game. Dirge's only mistake was underestimating Orin's insane lust for Baal's favor. I mean, why would Gortash of all people send someone who was already proved resistant to hive mind communication to retrieve an artifact capable of disrupting hive mind communication? Unless that was the plan. A plan crafted specifically by someone who knew his ally well enough to know humiliating an enemy would potentially blind Gortash to the threat that enemy might still possess. Withers, the final cutscene is his. Yo. Especially with Dark Urges, especially if you play as the Dark Urge, the whole game is putting things back into balance for Jurgle. So true. Withers, the main character? Nah, he's the dungeon master. Essentially, if you've played the Dark Urge, there's a literal like moment, and I'm not gonna spoil it in case you haven't played it, but there is a literal moment in the story where he plays dungeon master. Oh, look at this iconic picture. Who is depicted most prominently as the largest figure ringed protectively by companions? Who is the only one who have their backstory NPC there featured prominently over the shoulder, while not even all origins made the cut to be included? Karlach's not even up there. Who is an archetypal hero's journey protagonist akin to an old fable, a heroic exiled prince who has the closest ties to the titular city of Baldur's Gate? Wyll. It's Wyll. This is the correct answer. I'm not sure there is an objectively correct answer, but I'm glad there are others like you who share my sentiments. Wyll gets underappreciated, I feel, a lot of times. I agree with this. I love Wyll as a character, but a lot of people think he's boring or just stale, which I really don't think is true. I feel a lot of times precisely because he has very old school archetypal hero of the story energy that plays into expectations and thus isn't spicy enough for a lot of people, which is also valid, but being a genuine good guy is a plus in my book. especially nowadays. Also, the once again very stereotypical enemies to lovers spin it gives to a Karlach romance that can lead to a kind of acceptance of his curse is just sweet, and I'm a sap. I've actually never done that. I've never romanced Karlach and Wyll. So after reading that, I kind of want to do a run as Wyll and romance Karlach. I might actually do that. That sounds badass. That sounds like such a good... Oh, that sounds so good. Maybe I should play through the game all the way as all the origin characters, but I would definitely have to do it like on YouTube somehow. Maybe make them into videos. But those would be long videos, dude. Those would be way too long. I don't even know if that would be possible. I don't know. If you made it to this point in the video and you're still listening, if you have any thoughts on how I could do something like that, let me know. And regarding this picture, there's another person that said, I see Astarion as ringed by the others. A similarly valid take. I was mostly being tongue-in-cheek because my first playthrough was Wyll, but yeah, that is actually a valid take. He is arguably the center of attention here. But it is true that Wyll is bigger and over top of everybody. I haven't seen this video, but apparently someone on YouTube did a what would happen to each origin if the main character never existed theorycraft and gave pretty compelling justification for each one. In summary, Shadowheart survives, saves Aelin, kills Viconia and frees her parents and defeats the Netherbrain. Minthara joins her. Halsin, Jaheira, and Minsk are ignored. Everyone else dies or never leaves Act 1, except for Lae'zel, who dies in Act 2 to the Shadow Curse. Damn, I'm gonna have to see if I can find that video. If I can find that video, I'll link it below. Because that actually makes a lot of sense. Damn, that makes too much sense, dude. Shadowheart really is main character energy, like through and through. At least, like in this game specifically. Wyll dies because he has 10 HP, 12 AC, and his first move is jumping to melee range to use his rapier +3 to hit instead of Eldritch Blast +5 to hit. Karlach died because, according to the video, she either faces the paladins or she gets caught by them. I don't think the video went into it, but I'm guessing she gets hit with hold person followed by an auto crit divine smite, or her engine could just blow up eventually. The video did rely on game mechanics heavily in the first part, but if you consider the story more than purely how it plays out in the game, you could see the famous Blade of Frontiers not immediately dying to goblins, and then as people discussed, he teams up with Karlach. Maybe they help the Grove or go straight for the Duke. Ultimately, they will die if they get too far from Shadowheart because she has the prism, but maybe the Emperor convinces her to join them. One of them would kill the other. Karlach is also being hunted by other people than Wyll as well. I don't know why Wyll would die unless it's by Karlach's hand, maybe trying to save the tieflings from the druid/absolute. It's only a matter of time before the innocents are kicked out and the goblins kill them anyway. The way Wyll dies is that tadpole. Even if Karlach doesn't kill him, he's either getting mind controlled by the absolute at some point or just turning into a mind flayer. I mean, damn, well, if you look at it that way, then Shadowheart is literally the only person that could be the main character in that case, because she's the only one with the prism. If she doesn't team up with anybody, nobody has that protection. So she's the only one that can actually move forward. Scratch, obviously. Lae'zel and Astarion aren't going to form a team, so they're out. Gale is stuck. Karlach is on the run. Darge takes the obvious top spot, but I think Wyll would be the main character if we're limited to origin companions. This is the correct answer, and I can't believe I had to scroll this far to find it. Wyll's tie to Baldur's Gate and his father, Duke Ravengard, are enough of a hook to pull him through all 3 acts. Damn, that's true. That's hella true. It literally starts in Act 1 at Joaquin's Rest. Shadowheart, she's the one with the prism in the beginning. As far as I know, she's the only one who had to do 2 major decisions that will impact her life in a major way forever if you count dying, lol. If you don't count dying. The others only have 1. What is the second major decision? She kills the Night Song. Oh! It's her parents. Her parents. Kills or saves the Night Song. I didn't mean to just say kill. I agree with your take with the Dirge comments, but this is by looking at their stories. If we now look at it from a personality point of view, let's see where the character falls in the 5-man band trope. Hero leader is Wyll, contrasting foil to the hero is Astarion. Good take, good take. Heart of the group, Karlach. The brain, Gale. The brawn, Karlach. Roles are cumulative. Is that correct? Or Lae'zel. Shadowheart doesn't really fit anywhere, but from this perspective, it's Wyll who fits more naturally as the team leader. That's also kind of true, but mechanically and player choice-wise, I go over this in my actual Shadowheart video, she is actually the heart of the group, according to statistics, I believe. But again, we'll get into that in the next video. Wyll is the definitive logical choice to fulfill the archetypal protagonist role. Okay. Like, obviously, everyone says the Dark Urge is the main character, but that's not the point of this video. Like, obviously, I think the whole of Baldur's Gate 3 community collectively agrees that the Dark Urge is the main character. But from these posts that I'm reading, I'm starting to think Wyll is probably the most main character in people's perspectives. Even more so above Shadowheart. It seems like I'm seeing more Wyll than I'm seeing Shadowheart or anybody else. Or even Lae'zel. Because she's been thrown as number one a few times. As usual, everyone is saying Dirge. I strongly disagree, but don't have the patience to explain why when a couple other brave souls in the comments have already said it better than I would. I think to answer OP's question, Shadowheart makes the most sense. If you play as her origin, she's not trapped in a pod on the Nautiloid, so that's not an issue. And she has a tadpole, so Lae'zel doesn't kill her just like a Tav. And she has the prism. She can go through the entire game from the beach to the end solo if she wants, and the story will play out just fine. So I vote Shadowheart based on my interpretation of the OP question. If I interpret the question differently, the answer is Tav, in my opinion, but I've been in the sub for a long time. This guy seems kind of jaded. You're my spirit animal, the Emperor. True. Not an origin character, but as just like any character, if you want to say any character could be the main character, the Emperor is literally, spoiler alert, click away from the video if you don't want spoiler of who the Emperor is. Balduron. The Emperor is literally Balduron, the dude who founded Baldur's Gate. I mean, how does it get more main character than that? Damn, we could really sit here all day and just go through comments and posts like this. Lae'zel and Shadowheart as a duo, especially if they continue to have more dialogue and conflict as the game went on. I love this idea. They're basically both approaching some of the same themes, faith, loyalty, sense of purpose, etc., from different cultural points of view. Arguably, they actually have very similar approaches and can't see past merely superficial racial differences. A story about the two of them slowly convincing one another to rebel against their gods, while bickering a lot along the way, would be really interesting. Not sure they'd make a good romantic couple though, nor could I see either of them organically romancing any of the other characters. I don't know, the aspect of a Tavless story would have to be better developed. I really like that. That is like, they really are two sides of the same coin if you look at it that way. That was awesome. Like Shadowheart has Shar and Lae'zel has Vlaakith, but they both eventually find out that their gods are not shit. Well, obviously they're both powerful, but they still ain't shit. Dirge, Tav is Dark Urge, Dirge, I think Dirge, Wyll, Shadowheart, Lae'zel, Dirge, Gale, Lae'zel, Shadowheart, Lae'zel, Wyll. Lae'zel feels integral. Gale, like, oops, I'm also pretty important to how this all will unfold. Astarion and Karlach, like, look, we have sad stories to make you feel for us, and we're cool characters. Wyll and Shadowheart are kind of the sweethearts of the story. Dirge is a boring answer. See, I'm kind of in the same boat. Probably because Baldur's Gate's been out for 2 years now, but he's obviously like, it's undeniable. Wyll, because he has main character vibes and the most personal stakes in Act 3. All right, guys. I'm starting to think Wyll might actually be the main character above Shadowheart. I feel like as a protagonist, Lae'zel or Shadowheart have the most development, Gale a strong third, Astarion and Karlach have strong secondary character stories, Wyll and Dirge have the most open stories to be everyman types, with Dirge being more open-ended. I think though that Lae'zel is the most interesting though, partly because she's got such a different background. When I don't play as her, I find her as the main character still at times. People downvoted that. Oh wow, people downvoted a lot of these. Lae'zel overall makes the most sense to me. Part of a race who directly oppose and have deep history with the Lithids. Part of a party searching for a stolen Githyanki artifact which turns out to be a powerful weapon against said foes. The main story, almost regardless of how or who you play, ends up with the decision impacting the entirety of Githyanki society. Very true. Has the most direct and realistic option for a cure. True. I think overall has the most opportunities to die in a cutscene. Interesting. I think that's also true. 100% Dirge. Tav shouldn't even be part of the game. Dirge literally is the whole reason any of Baldur's Gate 3 happens. Ball is technically the main character because his spawn are the protagonists in all 3 games. True. Good perspective, good take. It's actually Ball versus Withers. Those are the main characters of Baldur's Gate 3. That's my final take. Baldur's Gate 3 is about Ball versus Withers. There are so many takes on this topic, and a lot of the time it can really just be about perspective, even if there are obvious truths. I really want to know what your thoughts are on who you guys think the main character is, so please leave a comment down below and let me know. My favorite part of YouTube is hearing what you guys have to say, and I'm genuinely interested in what you guys think. And stay tuned for the series, as I will be releasing videos on why each of the origin characters is actually the true main character of Baldur's Gate 3. We could sit here and scroll posts forever, but the truth is, every companion feels like the main character in their own way. That's why I'm doing this series. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more, please leave a like, hit the hype button, and subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, Purge evil.
Yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah.